Okay. Good evening and welcome to our June 18th program tonight. I'm filling in for Linda Beamer tonight, and thank you for joining us. And we'd like to also thank the Phelps Mansion for hosting us in their ballroom. Early voting took out the Decker room for us tonight, so we're lucky to have a place to give our program, and this is very beautiful, so it's great to be here. We would also like to thank those of you that are joining us via Zoom or through Facebook. And lastly, we'd like to thank our Broome County Historical Society trustee board member, Margaret Hadsel, who also is the historian for the town of Vestal. She supplied all the lovely cookies that we had tonight. There was a lot of them, they were good, so that was nice. If you are a member of the Broome County Historical Society, you received this flyer about tonight's program. And if you are not a member and would like to join, there's some membership forms back on the cookie and punch table. It's an all-volunteer organization, and we certainly also, if you would like to volunteer, we also would love to have you join us as a volunteer. We do not have any programs in July and August, but we'll start back up in September on the 17th, and very soon there will be a list of programs that will be up and running for the 25-26 season. Wow, it's coming soon. So our presentation tonight is on the history of diners in Broome County in the Southern Tier, and our speaker is Mike Engel, who has been researching diners since the 1990s. He's the co-author of Diners of New York and the sole author of Diners of the Great Lakes. Mike will focus on the manufacture of lunch wagons and diners of the first half of the 20th century in the Great Lakes region. He currently works at Hudson Valley Community College in Troy, New York, but also has taught mathematics in the Western Catskills. Many thanks, Mike, for educating us on this program. So when we drive by any of the Broome County diners, one on Main Street and one in Binghamton and one on Main Street in Johnson City, we'll have more to think about. So, Mike, if you'd like to give us
This crowd is fantastic. Thank you for coming out. I just wanted to do a quick improv. I was going through another slideshow, and I really like this slide. There's a lot of subtle history in this slide. If you think of the movie Diner from the 80s, this is kind of how that movie started, where kids started going to diners. Because in the 1920s, basically it was an all-male thing, but here you are, some teenagers slumming it at a diner in the 1920s. And I just love that. It's culture, it's history. So I'm going to switch to our slideshow, but I just wanted to lunch wagons started out really small, and they started out where basically just like wagons today, just like vehicles like this in Binghamton, you just went to the outside window and you ordered something. There was no place to sit inside. And the people that ran it were all different nationalities. A lot of them were Irish starting out, but it didn't matter. You came here, this was kind of a good way to start. If you looked at the 1890s, they called it the Gilded Age. Really, 50% of Americans were dirt poor at the time. If you could start a lunch wagon, you could run your own business. You can kind of get free of the 12-hour shifts in a factory and get the 12-hour shifts at the lunch wagon. But at least you ran your own business. Another one, again, it's kind of like history repeats itself. And all through time, right, different manufacturers built these small lunch wagons and small diners. This was for the 1940s. just a little small place as kind of an ode to history. Out in the Midwest, you had these little square buildings. These were actually built at a factory in Kansas and then shipped to various places. So the whole country had these odes to lunch wagons. Here it is on a truck, and here's one set up. So lunch wagons were really part of our history since the 1890s. And the big thing that makes any kind of these buildings, really in my mind, is the counter and a welcoming owner. So let's bring it back to Broome County. Here's downtown Binghamton on Shenango Street. Does everybody see the lunch wagon here? Yes. So, like I said, they started out in the 1890s. There's some entrepreneurial men from New England that said, you know what? I want to build them and send them out to various cities. And one of them had over 300 lunch wagons in various cities in New York, Pennsylvania, all over New England, and even out farther west. We found a couple in Denver. So he brought this to Binghamton, sold it to a local guy after 3 years, Ned Cornblate, and he ran it for about 10, 15 years. In the smaller cities or villages like Deposit, it was a big thing when the town got a lunch wagon. Still a dirt road, but you know what? They're the big city because they now have a lunch wagon. And places like Waverly put it in their newspaper. Hey, we are the big city, we now have a lunch wagon. And just finding those old articles is just really amusing. So this is what they would look like, many of them on the inside. Not much place to sit because most people would kind of grab their meal and go, but a few people could sit down, and then kind of that nice window up here to give the place a little class. And a lot of them would be war heroes of the time, popular politicians, or I'm not sure what that is. It kind of looks like maybe a poet or something on this one, but just various things of the time, like we have popular culture on television, they had popular culture. But even though the lunch wagons were made to be brought from place to place, sometimes they wanted to settle down. This one was in Downsville, up in the Catskills. And they just got sick of bringing it from location to location, and they put it on a foundation. This one ended up going to Shavertown, and obviously, you know, Shavertown's under the reservoir up there. So, right. What did they have is absolutely fascinating too. There's a museum out in Ann Arbor, Michigan that actually will do monthly articles just on, or monthly presentations like this, but they do it on culinary history. And diners have their own subtle culinary history. When you look at the 1890s, they called it Bohemianism, right? It was the culture of sandwiches, the cult of pies. It was an absolutely fascinating time because they went from these big meals to sandwiches for the night workers, a piece of pie for the night workers. And oysters were much more popular than they were today, even though I do not see it on this one. But there's other kind of fascinating things here. Pickled tongue, cannibal sandwich, which we found out was a raw meat sandwich. Yes, tartare, yes. Bunch of pies, various things. And yeah, and the prices were kind of fascinating. But this was right before World War II, so this was about the 1910s, out of a lunch wagon out of Walton, New York. Now, here's one from Johnson City that I was absolutely thrilled to see. Picture of an inside of a lunch wagon that I later found out was built up in Glens Falls, New York. And even more, the builder was a staunch prohibitionist. Now, why would a prohibitionist care about building lunch wagons? Right? No alcohol. There were, I believe, someone may correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was the Raines law. It had something to do with serving food with alcohol. So a lot of the places would get the night workers to come in, get a sandwich, but then they had to buy a beer as well. So the prohibitionists, especially in New York City, said, we don't want that. We want the workers who are working at night to have a square meal or a sandwich at a lunch wagon. And this guy up in Glens Falls decided to, I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to put them all over New York. So over time, everything grows. From that design, the lunch wagons got bigger, and they looked more like diners of the 20s or 30s. I don't want to say today, but more the 20s or 30s. But it was still only 30 by 10, if you can imagine that. Other people started building this in. One of my favorite companies from the Great Lakes, the Warden Dickinson Dining Car Company, a hoteler came together with a local businessman / mayor and decided to build diners and hawk them all over the Northeast. They sent them to Ohio, they sent them to this area, they sent a few even to New England, and they tried Florida. But Florida didn't work, which we'll talk about a little later. But they had these diners that were, again, a business for them, but it was also a business for a new owner. Now, one thing that they took advantage of in the 1920s, we'll get to in a minute. So think about what the 1920s brought. Here's a horse bringing the lunch wagon into its place. And this is nearby Owego. They supplied me with this photo, bringing one of those Warden Dickinson diners to Owego. And they brought it in by horse, which I just found was absolutely fascinating. And here it was 10 years later. You'll notice business was pretty good. They could build a little addition on the side. But these diners, like I said, were all over. Ithaca, up in Homer, up in Cortland. These were all over the area. And even here's one in Binghamton, where something that you won't see today is deer on the side of the diner.
Were they started it there, or were they just hanging it because it was deer season?
I think they were just, I hope they were hanging it because of deer season, but of course, probably deer was perfectly normal at the time, so. Right? This was on Water Street. It took me a moment to remember, but this was on Water Street. Right. Shenango Bridge had a diner from a different manufacturer. I have a feeling, and I haven't confirmed this, but there were two diners that came in the 20s called the Club Diners. And one was on Shenango Street and one was in Johnson City. And then they disappeared about 5-6 years later. I have a feeling one of them was this diner and the other one went to the Five Corners in Vestal. But it's just my guess. Right. And speak of the devil, here's that one in the Five Corners. So this has another thing and another clue to what the 20s brought. There's a lot of lure, especially with Route 66, of having diners near gas stations. And it was actually very rare to have a diner near a gas station, especially in the 20s and 30s. Culturally, diners were more for downtown areas, very busy walking areas, or areas where you get to from a trolley. Right? And the cars, which is where my clue is going, came a little later in the 20s. That cartoon that I showed you with the kids going to the diners was kind of the birth of suburbia and where kids had free times and they started going to diners. So it started coming around with suburbia. And here's where I'm going with that. Highways, people with Henry Ford building cars and making affordable cars. The 1920s, dirt roads were leaving, paved roads were coming. They were advertising in the 1920s. If you search on the old newspapers for the Liberty Highway, they're meeting in the 20s in Binghamton, all the neighboring towns. How do we get the traveling public to come to the Liberty Highway instead of up to Albany and over to Buffalo to the west? How to get them to take the Liberty Highway or the Lincoln Highway down in Pennsylvania. And this is another thing that really brought the diner in, is the car culture. So if you think about it, the 1920s, if you're traveling in a car, you have no air conditioning, which is going to be why Florida didn't have a lot of diners, right? You have the windows open, you have a lot of dirt from where the roads are dirt. You don't want to sit at a nice hotel lunchroom, you want to sit at a diner instead. So that's where diners kind of gain their popularity, is from the traveling public. Right? The motels too, I'm not going to talk about them, but again, people needed places to stay, and they didn't want to stay at the nice ritzy hotel when they're all dirty from the day's driving. And speaking of that change in time of the 1920s, why would I throw a covered bridge up here? Probably no one will get this. This is a very obscure reference. But in 1925, on the Liberty Highway, Deposit still had the covered bridge in the highway. And Endicott, an owner in Endicott, wanted to bring a diner from New Jersey up to Endicott. So they said, logically, let's take the Liberty Highway. Let's bring that diner up on a truck and let's bring it up there. Well, guess what the diner ran into? And the diner lost. What's even more fascinating about Endicott is they actually were progressive enough that they did not want a diner in town per se. They said you can have the diner, but you need to put a false facade up so that nobody sees the diner. You see a regular building and you walk inside and the diner's inside. So it was absolutely fascinating that they were doing that. Other places like Deposit, they covered their diner with stone, again, to make it look different. So there was always kind of a give and take of the diner style to other styles. And as diners were getting very popular, other companies got in this. So I'm going to take a little segue to Ohio for a second. There's a company called the Fremont Metal Body Company. They were building automobile bodies, or ambulance bodies. And for some reason they decided, let's build a diner. And here's one of the diners that they built. And it just looks kind of like a trolley car because it's got kind of that monitor roof. And they sold a few of them, but it was kind of more of a passing fad. What they really sold at the time were these cottages and garages. So as you had a new car and you needed a place to put it because you didn't have a place, they could sell a garage that looked very similar to this. Notice the style of this though. This style is going to come back in a second. They decided in about 1929, 1930 to build diners looking just like that cottage. And what you cannot tell here is that they actually built it like a loaf of bread backwards. They built it one slice at a time, put it on a rail car, and then bolted it together on site. And one of those diners made it to Binghamton, right on Henry Street. So you may recognize this address as the Queen Elizabeth. This was the diner before the Queen Elizabeth diner. They sent a diner to Elmira before Schoeneker's. If you remember Schoeneker's, that got kind of down the river during Agnes, but that was a famous diner, and its twin was the Wellsboro Diner, that I'll show in a moment. But other people decided to do that same kind of backwards loaf of bread style diner. A company out of New England, Sterling, they started from the J.B. Judkins Company, who were building high-end automobiles. And as you know, during the Great Depression, we lost a lot of that free money. The high-end automobile business went down, so they started building diners, and they built them the same way. One piece at a time. You could build them as long as you want. And this one is out in Buffalo, and I'll show it for a reason, because a lot of people are probably saying it looks a lot like Danny's Diner. Right? So this diner started out in Newark, New York. It was on Days of Our Life, if anybody remembers that, I think from the 80s or 90s. And somebody brought it to Buffalo, spent $2 million restoring it to kind of look like this. And it is absolutely packed day and night in one of their commercial districts in Buffalo. It's known as the Swan Street Diner. But Schoeneker's, which is the Wellsboro Diner, and the one that was in Elmira, built by the same company. Danny's, built by the same company. This is kind of more, this is Danny's inside, but this is kind of what the Newark Diner looked like before it moved to Buffalo. So they did definitely spend a lot of money remodeling it. But to me, still, this kind of speaks kind of the 70s to me. I see the booths, and I kind of think like Burger King or Wendy's in the 70s. It kind of has that plastic laminate kind of look. That, you know, just kind of these subtle things that kind of amuse me. And it's definitely not the 40s when it's built, but it's kind of history in its own way. But Danny started out down the street, again just showing that it was built by J.B. Judkins, and it had a factory representative out of Rochester, which is why there's so many of these in New York, because the guy from Rochester kind of went around from city to city. Hey, you want a diner? We'll sell you one.
How much did it cost?
Probably $14,000 to $16,000 at the time. And yeah, see, that's another thing that I kind of skipped the whole time is, you know, they started out in the 1890s, maybe $1,000, 1925, $5,000, and then getting up to $15,000, $20,000 here for a lot of the companies. This one was in Johnson City, another Sterling diner. This was the Club Diner that actually replaced one of my favorite Warren Dickinson diners that will come up in a moment. So this replaced a small diner because the owner had so much money from the last diner. He said, you know what? I want more customers. I want some booths. Now, I was always told that that diner in the previous slide became Walter's Diner. But when I look at Walter's Diner here, too many things kind of bother me. The window size just looks different. And I don't know about you, I don't want to spend the money putting in brand new windows and changing where the stanchions are, which is the support of the diner, because it might collapse from all the snow. They put a new front on, you know, stainless steel, which I can totally understand, but the windows bother me. So I had to reevaluate my history. Other companies got into it. With Rochester so popular with the Sterlings, there was another company in Rochester known as Rochester Grills. There was a company that was building pianos, and again, another high-end item that during the 30s, there was not a lot of piano business. They said, let's build a few diners on the side. And these were even wider. These actually had booths that could fit 6 people. Right? Here's one up in Norwich. Here's one over in Sydney. So there were a few of these diners. And the one that was in Johnson City got, hold on a second, I'm backwards. The one in Johnson City, like I said, was the Warren Dickinson. Well, in Endicott, so I got a little back up in my head, so excuse me for a second. In Endicott, the Ward and Dickinson Diner that got replaced from Johnson City ended up in Endicott, and on the left you can kind of see a monitor roof diner. That is the old diner from Johnson City that ended up in Endicott, and it got attached to another diner. So this is actually two diners in one. They used the second diner for a dining room, so they probably gutted the building, put in tables and booths, which would be the one on the left, and then have the original diner that had the counter. And then one more company in New York. So there was a company out of Oswego that had two people come together to say, you know what, we can also build diners. We can do the same thing with that loaf of bread, build them one piece at a time. Instead of the $12,000 or $14,000 diners, this was $5,000 to $8,000 diners, which sounds fantastic if you want to get in on the low end. And this one ended up in Cortland. And I am very happy that I threw this in here, because I was always told when I moved down to this area in 2002 that the Park Diner was just an on-site building. There was never a real diner there. So I said, you know what, I'd rather go to Danny's Diner. I'd rather go to the real diners, the Red Robin, other ones like that. Well, somebody showed me this picture last week. This was the Park Diner in, I think, the 70s or 80s. And I don't know about you, but I see a barrel roof there. Right. And it looks kind of shallow. That if I go back to this diner, they kind of look like the same diner, same manufacturer. They kind of look like that shallow roof. And they only built them in 1940, early 1941. Well, I went to the Park Diner today just to check it out. And I see on the wall that they were awarded some, I think the Park Diner Day, and it said it started in 1940. So I'm like, the roof or the ceiling, and starting in 1940 is good enough for me to say that the Park Diner was originally built in Oswego. So I was happy to find that out. But now, not all diners were built in a factory. Binghamton had their fair share of regular buildings that they call diners. Right? Some of them had kind of that look. They had that row of windows in front, but the guy that had the diner in Endicott, Viner, decided, you know what, I want an even bigger diner, and I want to design one myself. So he moved to Binghamton. He invited his friends from Endicott to come down and visit him down here at 272 Court Street. Other places like G&H on Front Street, again, less like an authentic diner, but again, still calling yourself a diner. Up in the Adirondacks in Lowville, another one that was built by a lumber company. Down in Whitney Point, the building is still there. It's used for the kitchen of the, I believe the Country Kitchen, if it's still got that same name. And even in Fish's Eddy, again, looks nothing like a diner, but they still called it a diner. Back to that Liberty Highway, Route 17. So that's up to World War II, right? You'll notice that very little kind of stainless steel. Kind of, they had metal or wood for the exterior, and inside they maybe had some porcelain, marble, but mostly wood. Well, get out of the World War II where things were not available, and they kind of took a hiatus on building just about everything. Stainless steel with the Art Deco movement became really popular, and diners said, you know what, we want to pick it up too. Because you know what, with stainless steel, it's easier to clean, it looks flashier, and it's something new. So places like the Queen Elizabeth said, you know what, we're going to replace that old diner, we're going to put a new diner here. And we're going to put stainless steel on it to, again, grab the customer's eye. Now another company that really picked up the business in this area was Mountain View Dining Car Company. They were out of New Jersey, and they were a very forward-looking diner company. They did not just look in the New Jersey, New York City, Long Island, Hudson Valley area. They looked all over the country. They tried the Midwest. This diner is one of my absolute favorites, so I have to throw it in here. It's right outside of Indianapolis. And this was built by Mountain View. You'll notice that this one is very narrow. They actually had to have it narrow so that they could bring it so far out into the Midwest on a train. And if they wanted a bigger diner, they would just have two of them and kind of bolt them together. Other thing that they brought the diners to was Florida. I talked about why Florida was not successful, because Carrier up in Syracuse had not invented the air conditioning in popularity. Right? But come the 40s, the diners started getting air conditioning. We could send the diners down there. So Mountain View took advantage of this, and you'll find a few of their diners still down there in places like Hollywood, Florida, Tampa Bay, that they had dozens at one time. But they had, like I said, 6 in the Binghamton area because they had a really good salesman. But this is the inside of the one out in Indianapolis. But bringing it back to Binghamton, the first one is the Aero Diner. I actually had a difficulty finding a good picture of the Aero because it moved out of town and it moved down the road to the Trail Diner in Milford, Pennsylvania. So they were working on it a couple of years ago, but they did put that back. But the other side, you can see the stainless steel. And again, it's got that kind of look of the 50s diner that a lot of people really think about. I'm hoping that they sell it and reopen it, but it's been there forever closed. So another diner that I didn't realize was a Mountain View, 1288 Front Street. Kind of might not sound significant, but this was the picture of what it looked like. It was originally, well, it was the canary first, and then the blue beacon, and then I am drawing a blank on what it became up until the 80s when they tore it down and replaced it with a building. Does anyone remember? I'm drawing a blank on my brain. I know it was a really famous restaurant. No.
What was the address again?
1288 Front Street. Maury's maybe? But we'll look it up and see it. I hate when I lose things in my mind. I get so excited by these diners that I just lose a lot of this information. But that's 2 of them that the guy sold in Binghamton. Our famous Red Robin. Right. One thing I love about this photo is the sign. I am so sad that the sign is no longer on the diner. It's supposedly in somebody's collection, but I'd rather see it on a building. Another fascinating thing that you kind of take for granted is that 7-Up sign. In the 70s, a lot of plastic replaced the metal signs. You know, you think about all the metal signs, all the neon signs that were in Binghamton at one time, and then come the 70s, they replaced them with so many plastic signs. But just absolutely fantastic. And then another one, the Tally Ho or Hits Diner was another Mountain View diner that unfortunately burned down, I believe, in the 80s. But again, there's another one built by that Mountain View company. They've really sent a lot here in the 50s to Binghamton. Another one just over the border. I am so bummed about Beaver's Diner. So my sad story about Beaver's Diner is when I first moved down to Bainbridge, I said, you know what, I'm down here, I want to travel down Route 11 and see what it looks like. And I go down Route 11 and there's Beaver's Diner, and I see it's packed, and I say, I don't want to go there, it's packed. Well, what happens 6 months later? Fire. It's gone. and they replaced it with, I think, a car dealership. So I never got to visit this place. But here's another diner that that Mountain View company sold to a local owner, and it's spent many years very successful. What is it? Oh, wow.
Yeah, 1288 is, yeah.
Okay, so Weiss Market, okay. Well, it was a restaurant up until or a diner up until the 80s. They tore it down, replaced it with another one. Yeah, so actually that's a good point. They may have moved it because again, the diners were super easy to move. So there was one other diner that I realized was a Mountain View Stoner's Diner on Main Street. And the only reason I realized it was when they were selling it off. They had this whole long legal article of everything that they had. Literally 14 ladles, 20 butter knives, 200 butter knives, and then at the very end, one Mountain View diner. But if anybody's ever seen a picture of Stoner's Diner, that's one I'd love to see a picture of. And then everyone knows the Skylark. So this was built by a different company, again out of New Jersey. And what the owner told me was that come the 60s, the stainless steel was kind of rusting and kind of getting old, that they replaced it with this look, more out of the reason that the diner wasn't looking so nice. And what I figured is the company that built this diner went out of business about 6 months later, so they were probably cutting corners kind of towards the end. They got taken over by the company that built the Lustron houses, so the metal houses. And the guy that ran them was, I guess, famous for cutting corners towards the end, so he's probably cutting corners at the diner business as well. But again, this is such a fantastic diner for kind of the visual picture of what a diner looked like in the 50s. Kind of that terrazzo floor, the really neat counter, just a neat, really look inside. And then speaking of another one that was in the Vestal area, the village chef, when it was getting ready to be taken away. So this came from Elmira as the Mayfair Diner, and they moved it, I think, the late 60s because of, I believe it was urban renewal out of Elmira, and it came to Vestal, became the village chef, kind of got more covered over the years, but they took it apart. They were going to move it to New Hampshire and reopen it. But what I heard was that the owner said it was too much money, it's too far away, so he just kind of scrapped this and unfortunately built an on-site restaurant and called it a diner. But totally substantial change. Just what happened here? Why is this a diner? So I talked about it at the very start with the immigrants coming over and running the lunch wagons. Well, come the 30s, come the 20s, the 40s, and the 50s, the Greeks started coming over here. You'd find the Greeks running places like candy kitchens, little lunch counters, but you'd also find them working in the kitchen of a diner, saving up their money week by week until they could buy a diner. And it was nice when they could buy a diner. In the 50s, they bought the stainless steel diners, especially more in the New Jersey area, but they also at the same time missed their homeland. They missed that rocky terracotta look of Greece. So one of the diner owners said, "Hey, manufacturer, can you build me a tribute to Greece?" And slowly but surely they brought in various pictures of Greece into buildings. They melded the two concepts together. They used stone coverings. They used the terracotta roofs. They gave it also the larger than life. This didn't have the kind of small barrel roof. This had that mansard roof, like we kind of picture McDonald's of the 70s as well. But it made the place look bigger, and it was just kind of the perfect meld of both things. Now you'll notice here, I included this because you'll notice that it's not the Coleman Dining Car Company, it's Coleman Industries. A lot of the diner builders were branching out. They weren't just building diners. This company built prisons, gas stations, banks, any kind of portable buildings you could think of. This company would build them. And obviously they would build a few diners, but diners no longer were their sole business. And I can always remember that there's a bank just down the road from me that kind of looked a lot like the Spot Diner. It had kind of the same stylings. Right. And the other one that thankfully reopened, another thing that has that style, that terracotta roof, built in the mansard style, and stone, and I wish I had a close-up of the lighting. Even the lighting is kind of colonial stylish. And a plastic sign as well. Kind of a subtle, tiny thing, but again, it was the 70s, they had different styles. Up the road in Oneonta was the Neptune Diner. So this diner started out in Oneonta and then moved down the road to Otsego, where I took this photo. And all that they did was they took off that mansard terracotta roof and kind of put on a flashier roof. And they replaced the diner with this guy for a few years. So we went from those $14,000 diners in the late 30s to over $2 million for this building. They were way more popular in New Jersey. We have one or two up in the Albany area, and they were all $1 million diners. They were 7, 8, 9, 10 pieces big. That it just blew my mind that they tore this down to put a Denny's there. I mean, you're tearing down a $3 million building. You had to pay a lot of money for the land, and then you rebuild it. They had a fish tank inside. But diners evolved over time, and this is where diners went around the year 2000. But to kind of finish up, just take a little step backwards, we got back to Route 17, no longer the Liberty Highway. It was really a 4-lane road for most of it. I always loved, I don't know about anybody else, but I always loved hitting Parksville and hitting that light and seeing the ice cream stand on the left. But just before I hit Parksville, I would hit this diner. Didn't look like this in about 2000. This was from the 80s that a guy I knew took. But when the diners retired from New Jersey, they came up to the Catskills, and about half a dozen diners came to the Catskills because they were used diners from New Jersey. This one came from Wayne and went up to Parksville and spent many years there doing business before it just sits there languishing. Another famous diner you might not recognize would be this diner. Again, another one that came up from New Jersey. I'm sorry?
Are you supposed to find Can Diner?
No. The next picture is going to show you. This was originally what the Roscoe Diner looked like. Blows your mind, doesn't it? Right? Here it is. The best picture I can find. It was probably a classic 1950s stainless steel, and so popular. I remember interviewing for a job out in Romulus, New York, and they asked me at the interview, do you know the Roscoe Diner? It was so popular out in the Finger Lakes, they knew the Roscoe Diner. It was just...
I know people drive from here down there just to go eat.
Yes. So this is really neat because this is what we kind of think like for the Route 66, kind of the diner on the side of the road that you visit. This is the Roscoe Diner. It's bigger, but it is that place. And then the last one that you may not think was really a diner building, which I'll finish up with, is just down the road, the Dobbs Diner. For many years, I did not think this was a diner. And then I find this article from New Jersey, I'm sorry, from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, for a similar looking diner that went to Pittston, very similar, and again, it's on wheels. And I said, oh, okay, so this was built by a diner manufacturer. So this diner is an actual building that was brought to the site as a diner. So, I'm sorry? Really? Okay. The beaver is right next to that. Okay, cool. Right. And one of my favorite things about diners is not just eating in them, but kind of learning the history of them too. I started out basically totally interested in kind of the history of them, and over the years I became more fascinated by that socio-cultural history of it, the prom party going to the diner, finding an article that I had up here that you probably couldn't read from 1897 from Elmira of women wanting their own lunch wagon in Elmira. And I think about Syracuse and Waterloo, the women's movement. There was a great article from Syracuse that had a lady taking over a lunch wagon, and on her first night she's absolutely petrified. She is so nervous because it's her first night running a lunch wagon, and here she is, at the time a meek woman running a lunch wagon, and an unruly customer comes in, and she builds up the courage to throw him out of the place. And here she is thinking in the back of the mind, I'm gonna get beat up. Well, who walks in? A policeman. And after that day, she had the confidence and she ran that place for a number of years, totally confident. And it just absolutely blows my mind because I thought all diners were men up to the 1920s, but there's this whole culture where the women's movement in Waterloo, Elmira, Syracuse, of that happening. And it's these side stories that kind of drew me in to so much more history than just building those diners and building those lunch wagons. So I'm going to end it there, and
would anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask?
I think every misconception, I always thought the diners came from old diner with railroad cars, and it was started diner. I guess I'm wrong.
right, yeah, it's actually kind of fascinating because people would always build diners from trolley cars and from railroad cars, but they were always seen as the cheap, dirty alternative, because you could buy them for $400, fix them up for maybe $200, and you got a dingy lunch wagon. Even into the 30s and 40s, when the trolley cars were going out of business, they would sell them as campground places, campground places to live, or as a roadside diner for cheap. But they were not the norm.
That Roscoe Diner, if I'm not mistaken, which I could be, that one that you showed is right off the exit.
Yes.
The original Roscoe Diner was to the right of that. They built that one and sold to customers from the original ones.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I never heard that.
Do any of those lunch wagons still exist? Are they in museums or anywhere?
Yes, the Henry Ford Museum, because Henry Ford frequented a lunch wagon when he was dirt poor, and he kind of had a sentimental kind of desire as he got older to save that history with everything else at the Greenfield Village. So he said, you know what? When somebody retired in 1924, he bought the lunch wagon, and they've kept it. And then in the 90s, they fixed it up, and you actually can go out there and buy like peanuts and popcorn from it, and it's actually part of the exhibit.
That picture in the corner over there on the left, that building to the left of the Security Mutual building, we lived in that in 1946 when we came up from Pennsylvania. On that top floor. That bottom floor was Peter's lunch, what my mother told me. She's still alive at 96. And I wonder if there's anybody here that knows anything about that diner.
Does anyone remember Peter's lunch?
First floor of the Security Mutual building was the community diner. First floor of that building.
Yeah, see, it's kind of fascinating. That's another thing about it is we kind of take all restaurants kind of for granted until they're gone, and then we kind of miss them. We're like, oh, where did that place go? So it's kind of fascinating because, you know, this building is history, but in its own way, diners are their own kind of history as well. That, you know, you don't kind of appreciate until they're gone. Let me get here and then I'll come right back.
It's like a diner now.
Yes.
Valley Joe is mansions. But what was the very first thought that you said, hey, I gotta search the history? Was it a childhood memory or?
It's totally bizarre because my parents never ate out. We almost always, it was the biggest thing to go to McDonald's as a kid. And, you know, I didn't realize that a lot of other families were the same way, but a friend brought me to a diner that was an absolute, this is a greasy spoon. This is a hole in the wall in Johnstown, New York. And I can't explain it. Something just clicked. And it's like, I want to find out more about this. And just diner after diner, I just got hooked.
Do you know any history of the Blue Dolphin Diner off Route 17?
That one I do not. Does anybody know the Blue Dolphin or the history of it? I mean, to me, I always got the feeling that it was somebody tried to imitate the look of the 70s, the look of Spot Diner, or, you know, those kind of 70s diner, and just did it as a regular building. And it's got all the feel of a diner. Okay. Yeah, I have not spoken to him.
Do you know what the culinary influences of your typical diner menu is? Is it like, you know, just purely American food? Is there a Greek influence? Have you looked into any of that?
It's really started out as kind of an American influence because, again, they wanted to serve their customer base. And then as the diners got super popular, a lot of the Greek owners realized, you know what, we want to increase our customer base, so we're just going to throw everything on there. And, you know, they eventually built up to those 6-page menus where they could throw some of their Greek specialties on there. I remember talking to one owner telling me in the 90s, I would make this big batch of gravy every week because my customers wanted everything that had gravy on it. And then come the 2010s, he really didn't do that much anymore. He just made a small batch of it because people didn't want the gravy meals as much. They wanted more of the salads and stuff like that, or the other items, or the breakfast.
We started with French fries and gravy, I think, in the 60s.
Yeah. Yeah, French fries and gravy, yes. And kind of, that's another thing that, like, I always look for fresh-made French fries. For me, fresh-made French fries are the way to go.
What about the diner or local Greyhound station?
Oh, the storefront. Yeah, I have actually never been there because every time I've tried to go there, it's been in between owners, so I've never got the chance to go there. But yeah, the Greyhound is kind of the perfect thing because you got the traveling public.
I got one more for you. I worked at the old Children's Ballpark, and the owner was Jewish. He liked the way I worked. He made me a cook in the grandstand. Then I worked for his father at the Hub Diner, which was a Jewish restaurant, just down the street, a couple doors from Woolworths. And I always said I wish I knew about the Reuben sandwiches back then. It was rolled from cotton, but you put them together, it's a great sandwich.
If anybody is interested, because I am a history nut, I did do a book on the history of diners of the Great Lakes. So it more focuses on anywhere from New York out to the Great Lakes, more in the eastern part. But if you are, I'm selling them for $20, so just if anybody's interested. If not, or if you want to just come up and talk.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And we'll see you in September. September 17th, our program is going to be on the history of the Memorial Bridge, which is a 100-year anniversary. Roger Luther, our Broome County historian, will be giving the presentation. I believe we'll be putting our programs from 25 and 26 on the website coming up soon, so you can check out next season. So thank you again for coming tonight, and thanks very much for